Hey Grauwelt fans, welcome to another episode of the Grauvlog. If you haven't seen any of these before, I am documenting via a vlog my progress on the second Grauwelt novel. Last week I was on chapter number 10, so I managed to pound out 6 chapters, almost one every day since last week, so I'm pretty proud of myself for that. Whether these are going to work out, of course, that's going to come much later when we start going through all the rounds of editing, and that's going to change a lot, but it's good to get something on paper to start. The topic of today's video is going to be something that I'm dealing with right now in the midst of this second book, and this is something that you always have to deal with if you are doing a series of short stories, or certainly a novel where there are going to be different chapters, is the pacing. For a lot of fantasy novels, the pacing kind of tends to be really slow, and that is because, being fantasy, it's a world unto itself, and it's not necessarily a world in which the reader is familiar. So the way that a lot of writers tend to get around that problem of, not necessarily a problem, but overcome the reader's lack of knowledge about the world is to describe it in really great detail. That's usually the way it's done, but that's not the way that I tend to like to read it. There are examples out there, and what I try to do is be a lot shorter with the descriptions and make the pacing a lot faster. And that's something you see more with sort of action thrillers, like a Tom Clancy type of deal. And the faster pacing tends to work better there because we're familiar with a lot of concepts. With the more fantastical setting becomes, the more description is necessary, but I think that there's a way to kind of marry the two things and get the best of both worlds. Get a fantasy novel that is fast-paced. So then the question becomes, how is this accomplished? How can you have a fantasy novel, a fantasy setting that's totally alien to the reader, at the same time making the pacing much faster than the traditional fantasy novel? I have a couple of different techniques to keep fantasy pacing a lot faster than is traditionally seen. The first one's fairly obvious, and that's shorter chapters. A lot of fantasy books have really long chapters. I mean, we're talking 30, 40, 50 pages sometimes. If you have shorter chapters, it's much faster to get through. You can read them very quickly, stop after a chapter, pick up again later. And so the chapters that I tend to write and would recommend would be anywhere from 5 to 15 pages maybe. There are some chapters that I've read in books that are 1 page or half a page, and that can work out to make things much faster. The second thing that I do that's kind of intimately related to the shorter chapters thing is showing multiple perspectives. So if you have multiple characters, multiple protagonists, certainly you're going to have a protagonist and an antagonist at least. I like to show both sides of that, so the scenes will transition. They kind of have a pattern to protagonist, antagonist, protagonist, antagonist. So you can get shorter scenes like that because you're not telling just one story. So if you do have multiple perspectives going on, even multiple first-person perspectives, you can transition from perspective to perspective in shorter chapters and keep it flowing much faster. The third thing that I do to make the fantasy novel faster in pace is to cut down on the descriptions. The emphasis should be on giving the reader just enough description so that their imagination can fill in the blanks. The way I like to look at it is a writer should, and this is what I strive to do, is just give you a pencil sketch of what the world looks like, and then your imagination fills in the color and makes the lines more solid. The very last thing that I do to make pacing faster, again, is to make the world building much less the central theme. The world building is the flavor that makes us like the food. So the world building is kind of, the salt and pepper that you sprinkle on the meat itself. It should not be the substance of the story. Your plot is the meat and potatoes. Your world building are the spices that you throw over top of it. That being said, as I'm writing Grauwelt Part 2, again, title still forthcoming. I don't know when I'm going to announce the final one. But as I'm writing that, I'm starting to see that I might need to make it even shorter in chapters. It's still probably going to be about the same length. I'm estimating about 520, 540 pages. But instead of 47 chapters, there may be, 50, 55 chapters, or at the very least, within chapters themselves have breaks that have multiple perspectives. Sometimes, especially with the antagonists, you have so many antagonists in the Grauwelt series that I'll have a chapter that's from 2 of their perspectives. So, chapter number 17, say, has, protagonist A and protagonist B, and there's a page break in between their two, and then it goes on to another chapter. So it's not just, if you have 4 different perspectives, it's one chapter does 1, 2, 3, and 4, and then the cycle starts over again. A lot of times I'll have one chapter that's, just the antagonists, one that's just the protagonists, and they might be delineated so that you kind of get a 2-for-1 sort of effect. And that's really the way I like to do it, me personally, and that's the way I like to read things. That's why, honestly, a lot of science fiction books I find a lot more entertaining than fantasy, is because they are so much faster and they don't plod along and have to feed the reader all these descriptions. The way I like to look at it is writing should kind of take a lesson from movie making. In movies, you don't have to read all the description, you just get the visualization. And then again, your imagination kind of fills in the blanks, like, okay, well, this, civilization looks like this, it feels like this, the people talk like this. Why is that? Well, the movie doesn't tell you. You kind of have to imagine that for yourself. And, it just moves along in these scenes very quickly, or much quicker than a book would normally read. And it's that sort of pacing that I think is more attractive in really anything, because otherwise you're going to lose a lot of interest unless things are faster. And those are just my tastes and opinions. I'd like to ask you guys whether you kind of like the traditional fantasy where it tends to be slower and more descriptive, or if you would like to see more of the kind of fast-paced, almost movie-like style of fantasy storytelling. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I'd also like to encourage everyone to visit the Grauwelt.com website. I'm going to put a link in the description of the video and also in the video itself. And with each one of these videos that I do, there's also a post on the website that goes more in depth and kind of gives a little bit of a different angle to what we're talking about. It's really hard to describe everything verbally in a video. I'm always thinking of things that I left out, or things that are just better to read and think about rather than just see in a video. So I'll put that link in the description and also in the video itself. Rate and share this video if you liked it, and don't forget to subscribe to the Grauwelt channel. I'll talk to you guys next time. Bye.